Well, good afternoon, everyone. Coach Chris here. Today I've had the opportunity to interview Gary Joralemon. Did I pronounce that right?
Correct.
All right. I met Gary just last week. He's running for school board, and after spending some time with him, I thought, wow, this is the kind of person we've been looking for Lucia Marr. I wanted to get him and do an interview for those of you that haven't met Gary to really get to know him a little bit more. I'm sure you'll be seeing him a lot more out there on the campaign trail, and we're going to get really behind Gary. And as we all know, that the fight that we've been in over the last 18 months with some of the people on the school board in Lucia Marr, it needs to be overhauled, and Gary's going to be one of the guys that is going to help us do that. So welcome today, Gary.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. So why don't you share with the audience just a little bit about your background and why you're running for school board?
Well, thank you. Like you, I'm a son of Oakland. I grew up in Oakland during the 60s and 70s, a rough time.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Historic time, but a chaotic time. Came down to San Luis Obispo in '81 to go to Cal Poly. Worked my way through Cal Poly in the campus carpenter shop and tending bar at a country western bar just off campus. And about halfway through my experience at Cal Poly, I got an internship up at the old El Paso de Robles School for Boys in Paso Robles, the old California Youth Authority facility. It was had about 700 youthful offenders, mostly from Southern California. About 3/4 had gone down for murder. So these were serious fellas.
Wow.
Serious boys. And my job was I would go up in the summer, and they gave me a little cart, and I'd get my cart and I'd go pick up my assistants from Southern California, my gang members, and I would go out to the track and set up these large-scale track meets they would put on during the summer in the evenings for the boys. And I was a physical education major, and my intent was to go back to Oakland, coach football, and teach physical education, but I got hooked with this type of a youngster. They were just really interesting to me. They were engaging. So I switched my major. I got a job working for the probation department in the juvenile. I was on the 10-year plan at Cal Poly. I got married. I had children. All of a sudden I have a mortgage and a full-time career job. So I had took me a little bit of time, but I did graduate. Stayed with the probation department for 33 years.
Oh wow.
Graduated.
Graduated.
I retired in 2015 with the rank of Chief Deputy Probation Officer, and about a third of that time was as the juvenile superintendent. The juvenile in San Luis is out on Highway 1, about halfway between Cuesta College and California Men's Colony, which I always saw as kind of symbolic.
Yeah. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Kids can make one decision or another.
Right.
During that time, I got a master's in leadership up at St. Mary's College in Moraga. Did some consulting, taught law enforcement classes throughout the state. I knew I kind of wanted an exit plan, so I got a job teaching at the police academy in Santa Maria.
Oh.
And then got a job teaching at Cuesta and then Cal Poly. So I continued to teach at Cuesta and Cal Poly. Criminal justice classes. My assignment at Cuesta is interesting. The California Men's Colony has a associate degree in sociology. So they send instructors into the prison.
Oh wow.
So I teach multicultural law enforcement and introduction to criminal justice in the prison with 32 student inmates, most of whom hopefully will parole at some point and
Get back into society.
Yeah, and hopefully with a degree.
Yeah.
Under their belt.
Well, that's good. That's great. Wow, what a background. I could see why you're, one of the reasons why you're running for school board. You have a passion for children. There's no doubt. I not only see that, but I can hear it in your heart that everybody's got a calling, I think, for different things. You have a career, and then a lot of times when you retire, you really kind of get to expand on that calling, I think. And what I see in you, Gary, is I can see why you run for school board. Man, I couldn't be more excited to have somebody like you
Well, thank you.
taking that on.
Thank you. Yeah, I do have a passion for kids, and not just the fun stuff like
Sure.
sports and
Well, yeah.
recreation. But in my business, my job was to keep them safe in a kind of a violent environment.
Yeah.
So my real passion is to keep youngsters safe, keep them safe, especially when they're at school, and with the parents' reasonable belief that they'll be taken care of.
Yeah, that's well. Well, it's interesting. When I first met Gary last week, we got to know each other and about backgrounds and stuff, and he kind of opened the interview today with both of us coming from a very similar background, that we both grew up in Oakland. I mean, what are the odds? I don't meet too many people that have grown up. Right.
I don't either.
And so, what's so neat in life, I think at this stage, at least for me in this stage of my life, there's no accidents. There's a timing that people all come together for the right reason, for the at the right time and the right people. I've just gotten to know that now. Like, a lot of times we think it's luck or by second happen chance, but there's just no accidents. You know what I mean? And to kind of just have that, it's interesting. We grew up in a time in the 60s in Oakland, which was rough, even back in the 60s, and so it was just neat to be able to share that with Gary, and got to know a little bit more and learned about his journey. And so here you are today, 2022, and getting ready to run for the school board. Why did you raise your hand? We're glad you raised your hand, but why?
Well, I was approached. I've had a presence, a relationship with Lucia Marr since I moved to the South County in the late 80s. Mm-hmm. 2 sons went through Lucia Marr, graduated. They will credit they do credit their success with their education. My wife's a 36-year physical education teacher, retired, and coach. Some may know her as Coach J or Ms. J.
Miss J or Coach J. All right.
Coach J up at Judkins. So I've been involved, and in about 14 years ago, I was approached by the union, and we met in Andrini's, kind of the unofficial campaign headquarters.
Yeah.
And they asked me to run. And I hadn't really thought about it, but I was honored, and I told them I would think about it. And then they said, and if you run, we will support you financially. We will support your campaign financially.
Wow.
And immediately, I saw a red flag. So I went home and I thought about it. I talked to my wife, and she said, "Why are you hesitant?" And I said, "Well, this just seems fishy. They offer me money today for my campaign. Next year, I'm negotiating their contract through a district attorney and the superintendent. That just seems to be a conflict of interest. I mean, I'm not the sharpest, but I'm thinking this just seems a little sketchy." So I respectfully declined. But throughout this era, some things have happened that have caused me progressive concern. And I'll just go over them.
Yeah, please do.
Last summer, there was a comment made by the president of the board, who had been to the graduation either to Rio Grande or to Pomo high schools. And he shared during the board meeting that he'd been traumatized by the presence of police officers with firearms. And he actually voted that night to defund law enforcement officers on campuses. Now, to their credit, the other members of the board voted to continue to fund. But I thought that was sad, because clearly this gentleman has some issues with law enforcement. And I don't know what they're based on. To be honest, it's none of my business. It's really between him and his therapist. But I think it's inappropriate for him to carry that forward.
Absolutely.
And to put youngsters at risk because he's got this issue with police officers and guns. And I don't know how long he's lived here. I've lived here long enough to remember when a boy took a loaded semi-automatic pistol and 60 rounds into a classroom at a Rio Grande high school. My oldest son was just across the quad.
Wow.
Takes the gun in, holds the class hostage. Luckily, 2 boys subdued him and were able to hold on to him until an area administrator got there and the school resource officer. And if they hadn't done that, we don't know what would have happened. We just don't know what would have happened. So I have a sensitivity for that. And I know my son, my youngest Vince, was a student body president his junior and senior year. And he worked closely with Officer Jason Hendricks, the Rogue Police Department, who I actually poached and hired at the probation department. I just was so impressed with him. And I really believe that having an officer on campus is a great example of community-oriented policing, because the kids are developing trust-based, non-enforcement relationships. And once they do that, they'll talk to the officer.
Sure.
And say, sometimes they have concerns.
Yeah.
So that was one reason. Another reason, and this has been going on a little bit longer, is that going back 18 years, and I'm sensitive to this because I think of my career, but going back about 18 years, we have these examples of CMR staff members sexually assaulting students.
Wow, I had no idea.
I know a lot of people don't, and when I say that, when I'm speaking to groups, I hear kind of a gasp.
Yeah.
But these are, documented. You can look it up. I'm thinking of 4. 3 of the 4 people were sent to either jail or prison.
Wow.
And what's interesting about all 4 is there were clear signs that something was going on. Clear signs. So now we have these traumatized youngsters. One, I think, will be traumatized the rest of her life, because this was an ongoing long-term situation with her, with a coach, and it all could have been avoided.
Yeah.
It all could have been avoided. So if I'm on the board, I'm really going to push to have what I call red flag training for administrators, counselors, coaches, and as many staff members as we can get, because like I said, they were all avoidable. And I don't know if it's a case of administrators being just kind of innocently naive or just being indifferent. I want to think they're just naive.
Yeah.
But this has to stop. I mean, at what point do we say enough's enough?
Yeah, one person going through that is enough. And these are the ones that they find out
These
about.
are the ones we know about.
How about the other ones? Because we all know if it's happening to 5 people, there's a lot more out there. And that's another thing that really stood out to me too, Gary, about your background and training, about being proactive in training in these situations, because this is real. This stuff is really happening. And if someone was trained to understand what to look for, because you're right, these are lifetime challenges that these poor kids are going to deal with for the rest of their lives. It's going to affect them in their relationships, in their marriages, in their community. I mean, this isn't just something that you get over really quick.
No, it's not. And I had a lady approach me. I was speaking to a group, and she approached me afterwards, and I didn't get the sense I have her vote, which is okay. But she said, why are you digging up old bones? Why are you going back so far? And I, looked at her and said, ma'am, respectfully, I don't think any of us should question how long someone is allowed to be traumatized.
That's right.
I don't think it's our role to do that.
No, it's not.
Because, 8 years, 18 years, 28 years, if it could have been avoided, and past behavior is a great predictor of future behavior.
Yeah.
And if these things have been missed by the board and by administration, well, there's no reason to believe this won't go on.
Well, that's right, and that's how we learn, right? So no matter, like you say, no matter how far back you go, yeah, you gotta go, because now you can learn and put those safeguards in place, So it's interesting that somebody would have that perspective, but that's just her opinion.
Yeah, and that's okay.
Yeah.
Another reason I'm running is at some point, and I'm not sure when this happened, the board, district administration, it seems like they stopped engaging parents.
Yeah.
And I know a lot of parents that are frustrated, they feel dismissed, they feel disrespected. And you know, anybody who does any hiking or backpacking knows you come across an animal, a cub, you better get out of there because mama or papa are close by. And it is an animal species. We don't like it when, as parents, we're dismissed.
Yeah.
So that's something that I would
Big
definitely work on. And I'm not talking about giving parents veto rights. I'm talking about re-engaging parents so that we now have a collaborative relationship between parents and teachers.
Yeah. No, and I think a good example of that, Gary, was this last year and a half going through COVID. I know because I was very involved in going to some of those meetings, talking to so many parents, and that was their biggest frustration. They didn't need to be right or wrong. They just wanted engagement and a partnership of how can we work together. Yes, we're going through a pandemic, but how can we work together for the best interest of our children, right? But they were shut down completely. I know. I spoke at some of those events. I went to those meetings, and they just took this attitude like they didn't care, you know. And a lot of these parents were crying. Their kids were crying. I mean, that's all they wanted was some conversation and some communication.
You know, over the lockdowns, through CMR, by their own numbers, lost approximately 8%.
Wow.
Have gone to private. The parents have put them out, private schools, homeschooling, or they just stopped going to school.
Yeah.
Which is really tragic. And I have a family member, and they pulled 3 of their kids out.
Yeah.
And put them in private school. And I asked the mom, you know, did anyone from the district ever ask you why? Or ask you, is there anything we can do? Is there anything we could have done to do better? And I think that's just tragic. I mean, when I had an employee, especially a really good employee, if they resigned and went somewhere else, I would take them out for coffee.
Yeah.
And we'd have an exit interview, just like this. We would just have a conversation. I'd say, so why are you really leaving? Yeah. Is there anything we could have done to keep you? Is there anything we can still do to keep you? But those conversations aren't happening. So if I'm on the board, we're going to have exit interviews with any parent of a youngster that's being de-enrolled, if they're willing, and find out how can we stop this bleeding, because we're losing a lot of kids, we're losing a ton of money, a ton of money.
Yeah, no, and it's just the beginning, because I know the tone that I'm very involved in the community, and the tone that I hear out there is that's going to continue if they don't start that kind of a partnership. There will be more homeschooling. There'll be there's a lot of other options that are popping up now out there for parents to start pulling kids out of public education. And for some parents, they can't afford private school or something where they really need to have public education, but they also need to have, you know, conversation and respect, mutual respect on both sides, you know.
Yeah, and it's just setting an appropriate tone, and it's setting a good example for our youngsters. And then finally, my belief is that there are members of the board who don't see themselves as leaders. They see themselves as activist advisors.
Oh, wow.
And I'll give you an example. A few years ago, there was a big issue with the Board of Trustees. They had made the decision to terminate the principals in the 3 middle schools, which, you know, when you decimate leadership of your 3 middle schools simultaneously, that's an issue.
Yeah.
Without cost.
Wow.
That was the first mistake, to make that decision. Second mistake is they didn't read, or they didn't anticipate the outpouring of emotional support from not just the teachers, but the parents.
Wow.
And I was at that meeting. They packed the boardroom, and, you know, person after person begged the board to don't do this. These are 3 really good principles. The board backed off without really any explanation, and I don't know how many tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees. But one of the board members in an interview with New Times, and you can look this up, and I'm paraphrasing it, she said something along the lines of, I know people think the board is dysfunctional, but all we need is the right person to come in and set our ship straight, meaning the right superintendent.
Right.
Well, with all due respect to the superintendent, and I've met Dr. Fawcett, and I liked him, it's not his job to lead the board. He's a paid employee. He's a well-paid employee, but he's a paid employee. He works at the discretion of the board. He works at the direction of the board. So this concept that when you become an elected board member, you're really not a leader, I think is
right.
Just foolishness.
Yeah, you brought up a good point, and I don't think people really understand that, but you're right. And like anything, without leadership, you're going to have problems.
You're going to have problems.
You're going to have problems. Well, any final thoughts, Gary? Man, thank you for. I learned so much more just listening to you today.
I appreciate that, Chris. I'll tell you, when I was a young probation officer, I had a juvenile gang caseload. I had gang kids from all over the county, so I had a lot of interaction with the high schools and middle schools all over the county, and I really believed at that time that Lucia Marr was the crown jewel. It was so much better organized, the kids were better supervised, better educated at every level. I don't know if I could say that today, but with the right leadership, I could say it again.
Now that's great, and I can tell that's the fire burning in you to be part of that right leadership.
It is.
Yeah. Well, you got the background. I'll tell you, we've been looking for a long time here, talking to a lot of different people, encouraging them to run for office. It's not easy, so I commend you for answering the call and doing that. I think you're the right guy.
Well,
I believe you're the right guy to be on that board.
Thank you. Thank you for your support.
Help that leadership. Thanks for being here today, Gary. We'll see you out there soon.
All right.
Everybody have a great day.